carnal behaviors. Even when we become true believers, we should be on guard against the old patterns of sinful behavior that tend to persist. Here's Dr. Gene Getz.
What is the sinful pattern that persisted in Jacob's life? Even though he had this salvation experience, even though he said, I'll always worship you, even though he said, I'll always put you first, as soon as I have something to do and to give, because he left everything behind when he went on this journey. But what was the sin pattern that persisted in this situation? Well, look at it. It's not an accident that it's recorded here. Genesis 29:1. Jacob resumed his journey and he went to the eastern country, that is, up in Haran. If you go to verse 13, when Laban heard the news about his sister's son Jacob, that is, Rebekah was Laban's sister, Jacob was her son. When Laban heard the news about his sister's son Jacob, he ran to meet him. Now remember, he's way up here in Haran, where Abraham had spent those 15 years. He hugged him, he kissed him. He'd never met him before, but he was kin. And then he took him to his house, and Jacob told him all that had happened, told him the whole story. Left out a few things, but I'm sure he didn't tell him all that he did, all of his deceptive behavior, his problems, how he took advantage of Esau. But he did tell him about what happened at Bethel and why he was there. Probably selectively shared with him why he was there. He was looking for a wife that was not a Canaanite. And so he could filter that story and make it sound pretty good. And can't blame him for that. But the old Jacob is going to emerge. Laban had 2 daughters. We see this in the verses that follow. The older was named Leah. The younger was named Rachel. And here the scriptures are very specific. Leah had delicate eyes. She was, just look into her eyes, very soft, delicate eyes. Rachel was shapely and beautiful. And so Jacob was attracted to what he saw. And Jacob loved Rachel. So he answered Laban. Now, Jacob sized up the situation very strategically. Because if you look at the text and you explore the text and the context, Laban was a materialist. Laban, as far as we know, hadn't met God personally. Only God knows that. There's no question he was manipulative, and he was pagan in his thinking, and he was a materialist. And Jacob knew that. It didn't take him long to figure it out. For one thing, it takes one to know one. And here's kin. And so he knew that. And so he also knows that this gal that he really was attracted to was the youngest. And Leah was the oldest. And he knew the culture and he knew the custom. And so what he's doing is strategizing to override the custom and the culture in Laban's mind. And it worked. And notice how he did it. I'll work for you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel. And boy, the cash register machine is really at work in old Laban's head. 7 years. 7 years. That's a lot of money that I can save if I just override this cultural custom. So Jacob is using his manipulative, deceptive behavior to win this girl. And he's using it on her father. And Laban replied, better that I give her to you than to some other man. I can just override that custom. Stay with me. But in the back of his mind, as we'll see, he is saying, I'll trick you. I'll deceive you. So you see this deceptive manipulation going on between Jacob and Laban. And you see it unfold in the rest of the story. So Jacob worked 7 years for Rachel. Boy, that's a long time. And they seem like only a few days to him because of his love for her. And you could build a wonderful love story on that. I mean, to work 7 years, for the girl you love. And so in spite of all of his manipulation, his humanness, there's a streak of beauty here, in a sense. And you can see this in what he was willing to do. Now, we're going to see that something happens here. But first, before we move to the next principle, I want to take you to 1 Corinthians 3. And the reason I'm taking you to 1 Corinthians 3 is because I believe that Jacob's a new believer, but you see, this old sin pattern was a part of his life. And it's easy to regress. Take matters in your own hands, to live a carnal life. And we see that illustrated in the lives of the Corinthians who were saved out of paganism. Brothers, I was not able to speak to you as spiritual people, but as people of the flesh, as babies in Christ. He's saying, even when I was with you, ministering to you. And when I was with you there in Corinth, I fed you milk. I didn't give you solid food. You were not yet able to receive it. In fact, as I'm writing this letter, which was about 3 years later, in fact, you are still not able because you're still fleshly. Paul is writing a letter back to them, and he hears about their fleshly, sinful behavior. For since there is envy and strife among you, are you not fleshly? Aren't you living like ordinary people? And there, when he says ordinary people, he's referring to unsaved people. Aren't you living like the worldly people around you who don't even know Jesus Christ? Now, there's a principle that emerges from this that I think applies to Jacob's life. It comes out of the life of the Corinthians. And that is, as believers, we should become mature in Christ and follow his example in all of our relationships. We've met that principle before, here even in the study of Jacob. And so the question is, what are some of the specific reasons it's easy for Christians to revert to old sin patterns in their lives? Well, those sin patterns can become part of the fabric of our personalities, the way we think. And that's why we need to renew our minds, because it's so easy to regress. And Satan looks for these chinks in our armor, and particularly for addictive behaviors. And one of the addictive behaviors we could probably attach to Jacob was his capacity to be deceptive and manipulative. Something he really learned well from his mother, particularly. And so we see him regressing. It was just very easy for him to draw from his past, what worked in the past, even as a believer, and use it on Uncle Laban.